Greetings, it is I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue our discussion on Spelljammer. We are talking about the various campaign settings that were originally introduced, many of them in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, but have been along with Dungeons & Dragons for many years. And of course, these are the Dungeons & Dragons adventures in space. I was going over all the races that you would encounter on space, and I'm going to begin talking about those races which are considered more monstrous, which are more likely that you aren't going to be playing them. I'm going to introduce a couple more today. Let's talk about the Arcane. The Arcane are mysterious spacefaring merchants who are incredibly tall, blue-skinned folks with elongated faces and elongated fingers, and their hands have an extra joint that most humanoids don't have. So they're very unusual and alien, and they act as these kind of traders throughout the known cosmos, being effectively middlemen in a lot of different deals. Spelljamming helms are their stock in trade. They're the main source of them throughout the known cosmos. Anywhere that's more civilized, they will appear and do this. And now they themselves are relatively physically weak. They don't tend to have a lot of it. They wear these like flowing robes, though you can find some that are more combat oriented with armor and such, but those are rarer. And they try to avoid combat and getting someone else to fight for them. If they need to, they are known to be able to become invisible or to dimension door by themselves to try to avoid combat. Now, we know very little of their society. We know that they often appear very individually, in single unit that when they travel in mysterious means. Sometimes you can find them traveling on a Spelljammer ship, but that is rare. It's not an impossibility, but then you will see them perhaps traveling in between two places if it behooves them to travel with whoever they're making deals with at the time. You can find them in groups, but this oftentimes is when it's more of a major deal. When there's like some kind of large-scale deal going on, then you will find multiple Arcane appearing together. Otherwise, again, it's on their own. Now, as I said, they kind of act like a middleman in making deals with various people, but they also deal with everyone. Literally everyone. They will make deals with no matter who they are, as long as they can have some kind of connection with them, they will make a deal. Sometimes they do have to go sort of in between to get into connection with certain people and certain groups that they can't deal with them directly, but they will deal with pretty much everyone. And their means and methods for this, they're very kind of calculated and cool about their trade, so it does seem off-putting to a lot of different people. They don't take kindly to things like haggling. They might humor you for a bit, but if you press it a lot, they will oftentimes just leave the deal because they have their standards that they go to cut and dry. They also don't take kindly to being threatened, to being insulted, or even blackmailed, and they don't like get directly on you when it comes to anger and vengeance. They have like a more subtle type of vengeance that if you've done that to an Arcane, you'll find yourself in trouble somewhere down the line, and it will be their fault. And you're not going to know when it's going to happen. So you've kind of signed yourself over. The fact is, if you want to make any kind of deal for helms, you're going to have to deal with them because they are the main supplier. If you do something to mess with them, to piss them off, or you just don't want to deal with them, unless you have something special, you're kind of out of luck getting anywhere in space. You know, it's really difficult to. They're seen making deals with both sides of a conflict, so they have nothing against politics or rivalries or anything like that. They don't care. So, like, two warring factions, they'll make deals with them. They don't care if they annihilate each other. There's plenty of other people to make deals with. Also, if you should try to make deals with them directly, it's pretty easy to contact one. You just sort of have to send messages out into space, so to say, word through the grapevine, and one will show up, or someone representing one will show up. Because if you're new business with them, they'll be a little cautious at first. They're pretty smart and good at what they do. Let's move on and talk about a race that has existed on many a planet, but is also a major threat in space. Beholders. Now, most people know about Beholders, the Eye Tyrants. They're very vicious and solitary when you get into planets. The problem is people don't imagine the fact that when you get into space, they travel in large groups together, in sort of family hives. Each hive seems to go to a ship, and the thing is, they would probably be more threatening than the Yogi, than the Mind Flayers ever could be. if they weren't in constant civil war with each other. So I'm not going to talk about just beholders in general. They're horrifying. Anti-magic eye, 10 eye stalks, each with a magical ability that will just mess up your day. When you get into space, you find ships of them that are oftentimes trying to war with each other. They see other races as like minor, maybe slaves at most. They are horribly xenophobic to each other. Groups of beholders will have small physical traits separated between them, and that's enough for them to go to war with each other, that one might have some extra chitin armor in a portion of its body, that they think that's the perfection of beholders. Now, beholdership is centered around a hive mother, sort of like a matriarch who looks a little different than most beholders, but has similar traits to whatever group is there, and acts as the captain and leader of them, the origin of that. There are also the Orbi. The Orbi are the only exception to this xenophobic idea, because the Orbi are a group of effectively living spelljammer helms that have been bred by beholders. So they don't use normal spelljamming helms. They have these Orbi, usually 1 to 5 per ship, that will use their combined abilities to make of course, beholder ship travel. Now, this doesn't, of course, mean they don't work with the Arcane. The Arcane often trade them building materials for their outsides of their ships and stuff. Other things that they can trade with them. But, of course, this also means that when a beholder ship gets in battle, it's oftentimes in with another beholder ship, that they battle each other out. And whoever loses, they oftentimes get devoured by the winners, and the Orbi are the only things that are left alive and taken aboard the new ship. So, Orbi get to keep living, yay! Now let's move on and talk about Dracons. Dracons appear like a dragon-type centaur. They have like the body of a brontosaur, the torso and arms of a would-be man, and a dragon-like head. They are very interesting creatures that are sort of new. They seem to have become from the edge of known space, from some unknown location. They have small colonies, their own ships that they've managed to develop, and they're getting out into space. So they are a relatively new race to be out there. From what we know about them, they like to travel in these herd groups, these tribal groups that are led by a elder who's elected for their own sort of strange genealogical reasons rather than strongest, smartest, oldest. They called the Kaaba. They have their own way of doing things. It all revolves around this connection of a group. You can find lone Dracons, but oftentimes they will join with another sort of family group to represent their family. Effectively, if they would lose their way in a family, they find a substitute one and are very loyal to them. They have this intense loyalty to them. So a Kaaba in a group is oftentimes accompanied by at least one Shalar, a high priest who has varying levels from 3 to 12, and would oftentimes be the one that's using any kind of helms. So you, of course, have Dracon ships with their family groups that are heading out that we don't know if they're lost from their continent or they're just stretched out. They have, like, ocean-based vessels that are built for larger creatures, of course, because they are a large centaur-like creature. And so they are very slow moving out into space now, but they have begun. If two groups should come together, they oftentimes get together. They then have some kind of process where a new leader is chosen from among them, and the old leader just finds it that's acceptable because, I mean, then they don't have to work as much. They were appointed this position because of their whatever it is in the genealogy of it, so they were important because of that. And, they were put a lot of extra work on them, so now someone else will take the work for them and they can rest. So they have a very interesting way of looking at things. They also, in large enough groups, will have more than one Shalar. You find a lot of them, especially if you get dozens and dozens of Dracons in larger groups. So, like a colony would, of course, have a whole bunch of them, representing a certain amount of the spiritual population. Now, very little is known about the Dracon homeworld. It's known to be an arid world where there's sort of two kinds of climates, a grassland climate and a desert, which is constantly shifting between the two of them. So they're known to be a migratory race because they follow these shifting grasslands, which are the place they want to be. Of course, they do have some oceans there, hence why they had the ships to begin with, that have been now adapted to being spelljamming ships, but they have a religion which is very similar to many of the other religions, like dwarven elven religions and such, but they actually have a kind of evil spirit that exists there that is represented by a spider-like creature. So they hate spiders, and they really hate Nyogi. They look at them as their, like, incarnation of their boogeyman, or their like, their devil, so to say. They're evil. So they really just don't want anything to do with Neogi and really despise them, to be honest. They like lizard men. Lizard men remind them of themselves. They revere dragons. Dragons are like messengers of the gods. The other races they sort of accept usually. They laugh at beholders and find them very comical, which, as long as beholders are fighting each other, that's not a problem. They look at centaurs and other similar type creatures as lost kin in hopes to help, elevate them to their new status as space-going travelers and, unite these sort of kinfolk. They see them, even though they're very different, as almost like blood. Very interesting thing. It's important to note that should you encounter Dracons and try to get in a fight with them, they prefer to retreat first rather than fight. They don't want to get in that combat if they don't need to. When forced into it, they will be ready for it. But it's all about the safety of their family more than anything, their family group that they travel with. So that's it for today. I introduced you to 3 more races. I talked about the Arcane, the mysterious merchants which travel throughout the multiverse and provide the majority of spelljamming helms to everyone. I talked about beholders in space, a race that's known to be on many planets and usually very individual there, but in space they go in little colony hives that are very dangerous if they weren't killing each other. And then I talked about the Dracons, a relatively new race to the spacefaring, which is an interesting group that seems like dragon-like centaurs that are fiercely loyal to those that they, gain connections with, and very family-oriented. In the next episode, I, of course, will go over gifts, the hippo-like people that love gunpowder, and the Neogi, the terrible slave masters, and one of the major threats currently in the universe, and a few other races. So if you have any questions, comments, anything you say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. Show support for the channel, the Empire, and the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you can check out my Patreon, link in the description below. Regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.